How's everybody doing? It's Jim here, and today we're looking at Glion Dolly. This is a budget-oriented scooter that retails for $429 from Glion. You can also buy it on Amazon and some other places like that for that same amount. But it kind of competes with these under $500 scooters. That's of course dominated by like the Xiaomi M365, some of the GoTrax models, and some of those. That's kind of what this scooter is really competing with. Scooter that's not necessarily new, but I hadn't really gotten around to reviewing it at this point, and I had reviewed the previous generation. So for me, from a data nerd standpoint, this is a fun one because I get to compare some data that I collected from one model to the next, and then at the end I'll kind of compare those and give you an idea if I think maybe these changes that they made were worth it. So going through specs of the scooter, we have here, it's a 36 volt scooter with 7.8 amp hours of lithium ion cells, LG lithium ion cells here in the deck. The motor is a 250 watt gearless. See, hopefully the glare from the sun isn't too bad just to see that. Motor with a listed peak output of 500 watts. And then, there's no listings as far as I could tell on what the actual controller output was, but the display is here. I'll show that in a second as we're riding. Very basic display with just a battery indicator. Build quality, I think, is pretty good for most part with the Glion. You can see here, some scooters, this support for the folding mechanism will be bolted down. You can see this is very strongly welded down. You've got some decent grip tape. It actually is pretty well put together for its budget category. I can't really speak much about Glion's customer support because I really haven't had to use it, but they seem to be responsive when I've had questions. So as far as componentry on this one, there isn't a lot to cover. You have 8-inch solid rubber tires, 200 millimeters. Pretty basic hinge mechanism. It's wide. It's very much like the first generation was, very wide. There is a little bit, I'll show you here, hopefully you can see this. There is some play in this mechanism that I just cannot get out. It seems to be the way these two pieces fit together. I've tried everything to minimize that play, but you don't really notice it that much while you're riding. One of the additions for this model is there's now just a basic spring fork on the front. Not a lot of travel, but it kind of does a job of removing some of the road vibrations that transmit through these solid rubber tires. Little stubby kickstand in the back, works quite well. An addition for this model is you have a friction emergency brake, and I'll try to show this. This actually grabs really strongly. It actually will lock up this tire quite quickly. And these are the Dolly wheels for the Dolly feature I'll show in a second. The controls going back to the motor here. Again, this is the Dolly handle, which is kind of the namesake of the scooter, of course. And we got here the charging port, which it's accessible at all times. It's a basic 2 amp charger, and it's about, I think I made it at 1.2 pounds. All those specs will be down in the description. Headlight here in the front. And we got a little tail light in the back. I'm going to cover a couple specs, but all those rest of the specs will be down in the description below. And I'll talk about some of them as we're riding as well. Fold up in its Dolly configuration. I weighed this at 28.7 pounds. And even though that's not ultra heavy, it really is nice to have this Dolly feature. So it just makes it a lot easier to move around with that handle. Easy to tilt and pull around with those wheels, and there's a resting point on the handlebars on this model so it doesn't scratch the top of the handlebars. We'll see as we're riding. This is kind of what separates this scooter in the budget category, having this ability. It's just more transportable, and it's nice to be able to store it upright. I really find that part useful in my garage, being able to store it in this upright position. Some of the other key specs on this: the deck is 16.5 inches by 5 1/4 inches wide. That is shorter than previous version because of this scuffer brake where it comes into here. There are a couple handlebar presets in here. You can see the bottom position and these two upper positions. So you get 36 and 39 inches from the deck up to the handlebars, and the handlebars are quite wide at 24 inches wide, which is nice for stability. The rest of the specs will be down in the description, dimensions on how it's folded and that kind of stuff will all be down below. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is the performance, and really I'm going to just show you the performance and talk about it as we're riding. And kind of the reason I'm doing this is I did run range test and I got a little over 9 miles, and I'll put that on the screen here, 9.11 miles, and I was down to 1 bar of battery indication on the display. So that's usually where I try to stop now, so I'm not really damaging batteries by going below 20%. Well, when I recharged that, they only used 190 watt hours, which is only half of the battery pack. So today I'm going to try to basically exhaust this thing. I'm going to try to hit the 15-mile mark. The previous generation of the Glion Dolly, I got 17 miles on one of my range tests. So I'm going to basically do that same path, and I'm hoping this stacks up pretty well because it has basically 100 watt hours more capacity. So let's put on the brain bucket and jump on the trail, and I'll touch base in a few times along the way. That was a little bit of a downhill, but this should give us a pretty, right down here, a pretty true, so we flatten out, true top speed. So the previous generation of the Glion Dolly seemed to get a little bit more of a bump in top speed right when you got off the charger, pretty dramatically, and then about a few minutes or half mile into a ride, you would start to drop. So what I've noticed on this model, it's not quite that increase isn't quite as dramatic. Differences between the two models, basically you end up gaining, this version of the scooter weighs a little over a pound more. You gain 100 watt hours of battery capacity. It goes from a Sony cell to a LG cell. You gain the front small suspension, the rear emergency scuffer brake, and the rear light. Other than that, and the difference up here on the handlebar where the folding mechanism where it rested, there was more of a cloth covering before. The rest of the scooter remains pretty much unchanged. Now, performance-wise, the Glion actually does pretty well acceleration. I'll put on the screen where it compares to other scooters as well as the previous version. It was a little slower to 100 feet with this version. Interestingly, as I'll put on the screen as well, the hill climb was actually significantly quicker. So I just think it's kind of interesting. They had a little slower acceleration but better hill climb. So as far as braking goes, I got poorer braking performance with the 225 than the 215, pretty dramatically with the electronic brake. But the advent of the scuffer brake, and I'll put that into the video here, it makes a big difference. One note about the rear scuffer brake, that brake does not cut power to the rear, so even though you have that brake back there, it does not cut power. So there's really no cutoff of power until you hit the actual electronic twist brake here. The controls on this are very easy to understand. It's very easy to get somebody comfortable using this quickly. All right, so I am about almost 2.5 miles into the ride here, and I don't know if you can see, but we just dropped 1 bar of battery indication. There are 4 bars. As I was saying before, I stopped my other range test when I got down to 1 bar, but came to find out when I recharged it, I was almost at about 50% battery. With this much shortened, even though it's only 1.5 inches shorter, the deck feels quite a bit shorter, because with the previous fender you could kind of put your foot up on it. You can't do that with this version of the Dolly, as it does take very little press onto that emergency friction brake to activate it, and so that just doesn't really work with this version. So it makes it a little more difficult to ride, like on these longer rides like I'm doing right now, as you kind of have to switch up your foot position quite a lot. All right, so we just ticked down to 2 batteries. We are at 4.5 miles about, a little over. One thing at this point, even though it doesn't look like my top speed, here we're going to do a top speed again. Looks like we're almost 15 miles per hour, so the top speed hasn't dropped a ton, but the acceleration and going over little tiny hills, you definitely notice a decrease in your available power. All right, so we got a drop down to 1 bar, and this was where my we're at just over 5 miles, and this is where my data driven reviews is maybe going to be put to the test. I am at the far point from my vehicle, and I'm going to push it a little further, assuming that my recharge was accurate. So here's where you're going to see, this is a pretty small hill, but as you get a little deeper in the battery pack, it still does a pretty decent job climbing, but you start to feel it a little bit. So I'm going to do a real brief ride around here at Sac State, so you can kind of see how this works on this kind of stuff. So I would think this might be one of the better uses for the Glion Dolly scooter around a campus like this. You know, it is still quite firm. Like you can probably sense that. You know, you don't have the comfort of some air tires, but then you don't have the concerns about getting flat. But at the same time, the comfort is pretty compromised. It's a little jarring. You can tell there's a little bit of help from this suspension fork in the front, but not a whole lot. You know, with the Dolly 215, I had the same sort of problem where I tried to commute into work on it, and I just couldn't do it. It actually made me dizzy. Now this takes a little bit of that vibration out with the front fork, but still the overall feeling to your body is still pretty rough. That being said, with these wide handlebars, it still is a pretty nimble scooter. It's pretty easy to handle, stable. I still think it's a pretty fun scooter to ride. And like I just said, I'm going to put my range testing to the test. So we were at a little over 6 miles. So I just stopped. I was at 1 bar of battery. Now it jumped back up to 3. So under load, this is definitely showing more conservative. Of course, you can see once you get on this stuff, it's just fine. It's just when you're on the when you're on a less smooth road, you start to really feel that vibration. So right now, school is not in session. So I'm gonna cruise around, and I think, unless I get a sign that says I can't ride, all right, looks like I can. So I'm gonna cruise here through campus, give you a little bit more feel on how this might be around the campus situation. Just going to show how easy this is to fold down real quick. If you were to be doing this, you pull up, drop it down, lock it into place, flip both of the handlebars down, kickstand of course, pop down, flip it around, handle up, and you're off. I really think this is the biggest selling point and differentiator for the Glion Dolly, is having this handle. Some other scooters have jockey wheels and such, but with it a little different, but just having this telescoping handle just make things a lot easier. It does have two positions, a lower and upper, and I'll make sure you pay attention as we ride. The things that make noise on this scooter when you ride, this is kind of a noise point, and these jockey wheels wiggle a little bit. So it is a little bit of a rattly scooter on the road, and you know, you feel quite a bit of road vibration, as we've heard, even with the suspension shock. Just, you know, the solid rubber tires, you're sacrificing comfort for durability, not having to change flats. Unfolding is just as easy. Release the mechanism, make sure everything seats into place. Handlebar, I'm going to try the lower handlebar position this time to see how I feel about that. And so we've recovered to 3 bars of battery, so it just looks like the underload battery reading is quite a bit off. So I feel, I'm 5'10", I feel like that's too low for me in that lower position. And you can go above, can you on this one? Oh, you cannot. Never mind. There we go. I think that the attractiveness to this scooter is, one, price, simplicity. So yeah, so the attractiveness of the scooter, one, price, simplicity, the dolly factor, and actually pretty good range for your, you know, scooters tend to be very optimistic in the range category and overestimation of their top speed. Glion seems to be pretty honest about it. I have, you know, that's kind of a rarity out there, and I'm testing this at a 175-pound rider, which most specifications for range and top speed are hard to reach at my weight. But you can see it'd be an easy way to get around campus, you know, or a campus, or getting from a train to an office, or from a car to just a last mile solution. So what I do on a hill like this, the deck on the Glion Dolly, I'll put the dimensions there down below. I think it was 5.5 inches to the top of the deck. That's right for me at the upper limit of what I find comfortable to kick, but you can easily kind of give it a little assist by kicking up the hill. Camera down here, it's just so you can see my feet. See how I have to orient that rear foot? It just makes it a little more difficult with that, where the fender connects into the deck, to get a good foot position. What's going on there, turkeys? Baby turkeys? Wow, that's a mess of turkeys. No wonder there's so many damn turkeys. All right, so you can see there on my watch and on the screen, I am closing on 15 miles. So that's kind of surprising. I didn't think, I was glad my experiment worked. In the name of science, I'm happy that it worked out. But I hope this look at and some riding on the Glion Dolly, you know, helped you get a feel for this scooter. I think as a budget scooter, it's a pretty good option that, unlike a lot of other under $500 scooters, actually it lives up to what it says it will do as far as range. You do start to get a little bit of a drop in speed. I'm gonna do top speed right here, right now. Hopefully I don't hit these turkeys. Watch out, turkeys! And you do definitely get a drop. I noticed at about 10, 11 miles, I started getting a bit of a drop in top speed. Not quite as dramatically as the outgoing 215 model. So still pretty good on the range side. All right, so just wrapping up here with the Glion Dolly. How do I think this thing compares with the outgoing model? I think for, you know, the decrease in price, and even though I think you're giving up some definite length on the, that's the biggest, I think, thing you're giving up with this model, the outgoing model, is giving up some of that footboard space. But you still got the folding feature, and you still got something that's actually matching and kind of exceeding its range claims, which is pretty unusual in the market, really. And it's $429, so it's pretty good, well priced for what it is. So hopefully I'll just look at the range and differences between the model helped you out. And thanks a lot. Talk to you next time.
Catch the wave, feel the